Hey everyone, it's Trena from John's Furniture Repair here, starting another project. So I'm just in the works with this dining room set here. It's a pretty huge job. It's got 6 chairs and this table, and they're going from this color to a natural blonde wood. So we're having to remove all of this color everywhere. And from the base, it's got a pretty big hefty base down there too, that we're going to remove everything and clean it up. So I've got a few pieces in the mix here. I've been working on chairs so far. So I've got 2 chairs and clamps right now here that we had taken completely apart, stripped down, sanded, and those are going to be in clamps overnight. And we've got another chair in the works on the sanding bench here. And I'm actually stripping the seats, but I'm not stripping the pieces because there's barely a finish on this stuff, and it just sands off pretty nice when we have to do quite a bit of sanding anyways. So I'm just using a 180 grit to gently remove the finish and give it a nice sand, and getting it all cleaned up to a nice clean natural look. So got a couple here that we finished that are outer clamps. So they'll just get another light sand, and then I'm just going to clear coat them in natural and maybe do a little bit of toning. This guy here, so it's a pretty big difference from what they were. I'll show you. This is the last one that I have together here that I gotta do my thing to. And it's a pretty nice change, I think. It makes it look a lot better, not so dark. So just gonna get to sanding the rest of this chair here that's on the bench, and get that one in clamps, and then get the last one apart, and that'll be 6 chairs. Let's get at it. Okay guys, so I've got all the pieces sanded, and I always hand sand after using the machine with the 180 paper. So I just want to make sure that I straighten out any little swirl marks that the sander might have left. Even though I did use a 180 in the sander, there still could be some marks, just to even out the edges and get everything sanded to the same level. This is one of the back posts. So the other thing that I do before putting everything back together is clean out all the joints. So in this piece, I usually just get for a tenon joint, just make sure the edges don't have glue on them. Make sure that there's going to be raw wood that they're going to connect to here, and that there's nothing impeding the way of the tenon coming in. And then on the ends that are going into the back or the bottom of the chair seat, I like to use a file just to get rid of any glue chunks and to rough up the wood so it's a good surface for glue. So I've done that to pretty much everything. The other thing that I always do is I keep a set of old Forstner bits around for cleaning out dowel joints. So this is a 1/2 inch Forstner bit that I've got here, and I just want to clean out anything that is left in that glue joint, just so that it's a nice clean surface inside and that there's fresh wood inside for the glue to adhere to. And I don't have to worry about something getting in the way when I put it back together. I've got some putty on pieces that need it. So I'm just using a water-based Timbermate light putty because we're sticking to natural on these pieces. I always think about my finish color instead of the wood color when I choose my putty. So anything that, you know, little holes that were where the nails were, anything that is a major defect or damage to the surface of the wood, I'm just going to give a little bit of putty. These are in pretty good condition though, so they didn't need a ton. So basically, after I've done all of the drilling out of the joints and made sure I've gone over everything to make sure there isn't any more puttying or anything to take care of, then the chair is ready for glue. So let me show you how we do that. Okay, so I've got the chair seat here. All the dowel holes are cleaned out. You can see set as an Imperial Loyalist. They had a wood burning label, so that's kind of nice. That stays after you clean it up. So I've got the chair flipped upside down, and my first pieces that I'm going to glue together are the legs. These chairs are funny because they have bigger front legs than back legs, so because they have a little bit of a lean, I guess. So these are my 2 front legs, these are my 2 back legs. So I'm just gonna lay them out. And I've got my West System epoxy and sawdust mixture here, so it's pretty thick. And I'm just going to coat the inside of those dowel holes, not too much, just all around the edge to make sure that the dowels are held all the way around, but not so much that I can't get the joint all the way seated. I've noticed that these chairs actually they look like they're not, the dowels aren't all the way in. And I've had a couple that I've just taken apart 3 times, making sure that they are in, but it just looks like they're not. So they've stopped the turning too high up the chair and left the dowel kind of sticking out a little bit more than I think looks good. But when it was in that dark color, I don't think you could really see it that much. I might have to do some color work on those ends, maybe painting a bit of the areas where you can't get the red out, you can see. All right, and I'll also put some glue in the bottom H brace here together, because we've got to put that all together before we put the legs into the chair. All right, so I always look at the nail hole, where the nail hole is on the bottom and where the nail hole was right here. I know that these two most likely went together that way. Same thing here, we've got the nail hole here, that makes sense. Except for that doesn't make sense, so you just gotta flip it up. Should have a wider front than back. And so now that I know my back legs, they're all angled properly. So these this part goes here. Pick it up, pop it on the chair, get the back legs bent into place. And give them a tap in. Good. So those are all seated in. I'm going to flip the chair over and get the top on before I get any of the clamps on the chair, 'cause it's harder to work with when there's clamps everywhere. So I'll just do the same thing. Coat all the inside surface all the way around on the inside. All right, and then the 2 back pieces. You can always tell which one is the back because the nail holes that we puttied are on the back, so you want to make sure You get those pointing to the back. And you want to seat these all the way down in their groove. Right back where they came. And then we can pop it in the chair. So now that we've got everything together, we can get some clamps on this guy. Most of my clamps are on the other chair, but I still have a bunch of long ones here, so we'll just make do with what we got. I like these quick grips for chairs because you don't need a ton of pressure with chair joints. Find if you put too much pressure on a chair, then you just end up pulling it out of joint a little bit. So I'm just going to make sure this is seated down on the back. That's good. And then I'm going to pop a clamp holding down the two back posts. You'll notice a little bit of glue squishing out there, and it kind of sits more upright, so that I know it's sitting in its joint all the way down. Back. Make sure that looks good. Yep. All right. So that'll sit in clamps overnight, just like the other two that we've got going. I would just leave it on the workbench because I'm always banging my shin off of clamps. But anyways, that's how we get a chair glued together. And these ones are fairly simple, so not a whole lot going on with these chairs, but they're nice chairs. I always thought of them as like nice cottage furniture. Kind of charming. All right, so there's only one more to take apart, so I'll show you guys how we do that. And then it'll just be sanding that chair up and getting it glued, and that'll be all 6 chairs. So let's get the other one and take it apart. Okay, so here's the last chair we've got. It's pretty loose. The back is rocking back and forth. So the first thing that I do to take these off is just with a rubber mallet, give them a couple of pats. And put that top half aside. And I flip the chair over. You guys can barely see. A lot of them have screws, which this one does, going into the legs and into the seat. These screws on these chairs have been so small that they weren't even doing anything, but I take from the seat to the H-brace, they just used screws. Now these are tiny though. They didn't even go into the seat, so I'm not really sure what the purpose of. Maybe just a wedge to keep it there, but it's definitely not going back in because it's not structural at all. I keep my clamps on overnight, so when I take everything off in the morning, it's not going anywhere and the screw's not going to help it. Not to mention that screws going into legs like this often weaken that joint, and I've seen a lot of legs just break right off. All right, so now that we have that off, we can see it's pretty loose here. Now these seats are tough to work on because right in the middle of this seat, you can see how they've kind of carved it so that it's pretty thin here. It gets even thinner right where it dips in for your butt here, and it's only about an 1/8 inch thick. So when I'm hitting this seat, it's very likely that these joints will split. And the only way to get them out is to pop them out that way or use a heat gun. That would help a little bit, but I found that, you know, you end up burning the wood and the joint still doesn't come loose because it's such a big joint. So I've just been working at tapping them out carefully, and they are pretty loose, so that's not a big deal. If these chairs were super, super tight and I had to take them apart, I would definitely have to do a soak on the joint with vinegar or the heat gun to get them out. But I've been having some pretty good success so far. And only one chair seat has broken on me, but it was already split, so I expected that to happen anyways. So let's just see how it goes. That joint on this side is pretty loose. Good. This side looks a little tighter. Good. Awesome. So that went just fine. Now that seat is loose. Okay, so I'll set that aside. And for these joints, I'm just gonna pop them out with the mallet. So when you're hitting it up against the rubber mat, it's bouncing the joint and breaking the glue, and then after that you need to hit it at least 3 or 4 more times and it'll just bounce itself right out of the joint. So it sounds loud and it's crazy, but it's not hurting the piece as long as you have a mat underneath. It's also just bouncing right out of that joint. Same with this guy. Good. The base taken apart. Now these guys are a little bit more tricky. They've got nails pinning in the mortise into the tenon into the mortise. So what I have had some luck with is just slowly pulling the nail out back and forth. Because if I start digging in here to get anywhere close to the nail, it's gonna make such a big mess. You can kind of see it right there. So it's probably a 1/4 inch in here, but it's right next against the edge of the wood. So it just wants to break out. So there's been quite a few breaks, but I've been able to pull out the nails pretty successfully. So you can see it just kind of pulled out the tenon. It was barely on the edge of that one. You can see where the nail was. And those nails are still in there. You can see them. So that's one side. It seems like one side was always easier than the other. So I'm just going to be really careful and just start to kind of pry and keep an eye on this wood here if it wants to break. So I'm just going to start getting some movement in the joint, break the glue loose. And I want the tenon to pull out of the nail. I don't want the nail to pull with the tenon. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. So here's the nail right here. And I've got a little bit of a bite on it. This one was a little closer to the surface. So what I want to do is hold my putty knife. I don't want to pry against the wood and dent it any more than it is. It's already buggered enough. So I'm just going to get a hold of it and then just use my putty knife as a surface to protect the wood around it. There we go. Just work that out of there. Little buggers causing so much trouble. The nails that are stuck in this back post, I'm going to push through the back and get them to come back out. Right there. Same with this guy. And then use my pliers again with the putty knife. All right, so everything is ready for stripping and sanding, and that's how we take the chair apart, guys. So okay guys, so I've got all the chairs prepped and lined up over here, so they're ready to go. I've got the table. The pullouts have these dowels that stop them from pulling out all the way, so those are all out of the bottom. So basically I'm going to take the pullouts out, and then I think I'm going to take the top off of the base just so I can get right in there and clean everything up, since it needs quite a bit of cleanup. It's a pretty nice table. I think it's going to come apart pretty easily to be able to sand every nook and cranny and get all that red out. So I'm going to set up to take it out and get it all apart. Definitely need to go on the same sides when they come off. So they should just pull right out. As we go. So these little pieces of wood here are just grooved to fit into a slot on this piece. And so it sits in that hole and it slides around for expansion and contraction. So that's pretty cool. So what I'll do is take these guys all off, and the top should come off. And that screw, of course, too. But I'll make sure to label these as well so they go back in the same spot. So now that should be loose. And that looks about loose, but this piece here is still doweled into the sides. So I'll probably have to take this skirt off too, because it pops out of this dowel. So which is easier to clean up that way anyways. Yeah. There, you can just see how it's doweled into the side of this guy here, holding that whole centerpiece in. So make sure to label this one as well. It's pretty awesome. So the other thing that this tabletop has is a pretty good split right down the middle, but at both ends, it's not split. So I don't think I'm going to be re-laminating this table. I'm kind of thinking about doing an epoxy fill. This table does have a little bit of warp in the leaves and in some of the pullouts, which is why I'm so reluctant to take it apart all the way. So I just kind of want to keep things pretty much the way they are. So it's working okay now, and it's not going to get much better just because it's all warped. So I'm not going to try playing with a bunch of crooked wood. So I think just doing an epoxy fill and giving it a good sand is probably what I'm going to do. All right, so we'll get this top off of the base. It's just a little bit heavy. So I've got the half of the table base sanded to 120. Obviously I had to do a lot of hand sanding in these areas and in these areas here, but I was able to use the sander for most of it. And then I got to go back with 180 on everything on this side before I flip it over to the other side up. So you can see I still got all the pieces on this side and the backs of those legs to do. It's taking a while. This finish doesn't strip very nicely, and we are having to sand it quite a bit anyways. So I just I don't usually, but on this project I forewent the stripping on most of it. The tops of the seats and the top of the table will get a chemical strip before we sand, but on the chair bases and The table base, I'm just sanding off everything. So lots of work and lots to go. It's not a small table, like even the main part of the table is pretty huge, so it'll be quite a bit of work getting everything back together. So I'll keep working at it. Okay guys, I've been doing some work here off camera. I've got the crack all epoxied and it's filled. This is stripped and ready for sanding. I've already sanded the undersides, so that's all good to go. The update on this is it's all sanded up to 180 with the hand sander and then hand sanded with 180 afterwards. So that's all ready for clear coats. These little areas in here were pesky buggers, but they look pretty good. So that's all ready to go. I've got the 2 pullouts just sitting in cauls, just so they don't warp any more than they already are while I'm stripping them, and these guys are off. I wasn't gonna take them off, but to clean up the underside nicely, it's kind of necessary. So I just have them sitting in cauls. This one's already stripped while I'm sanding and prepping everything, and once the slides are back on, I can take them out of the cauls. I know I'm not gonna straighten them out, I just don't want them to go any further. So next up is sanding the top and the 2 pullouts. And we've got all the chairs waiting here, ready to go. So we just got to get the table there and then it's off to the booth. All right, so I've been sanding the rest of the base and the 2 pull-out leaves, which are ready. And I've just got the top left to go. I've got the base reattached to the top and these side pieces put back in. So everything is back together under here and cleaned up. I've added these strips here. They were not on there originally, and I just feel like they should have been there in the first place, and maybe they were forgotten. Because if you do lift the pull-out too high when you're pushing it back in to underneath the table, then it can scratch on that piece. So I think that's a pretty important add-on. This will get a little bit of a sealer coat underneath, so I'll just have to tape that off. Wish I would have thought of that before I put those on there, because I could have put them on after, but it was just easier when it was all apart. But probably should have waited. Anyways, so everything looks good under here. And the base looks nice and clean. We were able to get all the red out of the corners and the edges, so that's all done. And basically now it's just sanding this top. It's gonna need quite a bit of sanding because of the split that we had filled here. I was able to straighten these leaves out a little bit. There's still a tiny curve, which is pretty unnoticeable. And I've added actually on the back to the runners, I've added an extra fastener to hold those pieces in place. Now I did make the slots bigger than the screws, so it can move back and forth. It just will hold it from warping off of the runner itself. There is still a little bit of a gap there because it's still warped a bit, but that's as tight as I could get it to stay. Hopefully it kind of over time flattens itself out now that it'll be sealed. So I'm just gonna wind up the sander, start with 120, get everything down, go with 180, get everything down, and then finish sand with 180 hand sanding. All right, let's get to it. Okay, we've got the table sanded. We started actually with 80 grit because it was so damaged, which I didn't notice right away. And so it was about an hour and a half of sanding with 80 grit. And then I moved to 120. and did quite a bit of sanding with 120 and then to 180 with the sander. And then we moved to 180 with the hand sander. So this tabletop has got a ton of hours of sanding on it, and it looks pretty good now. Whenever you sand with 80 grit, you really got to climb up the sandpaper ladder just to make sure you don't have any little swirls and scratches from the 80 grit sander. And I think we've pretty much got them all. This is going in a natural color, which will be a lot more yellow than it looks like right now, but hopefully that hides any little scratches that I missed. It's not gonna have a stain that would make those pop out, so I think it'll look pretty good. So we are finally ready to take everything off to the booth for clear coats. And I think I'll do at least 5 coats of post-catalyzed lacquer on the tops of these, and at least 3 to 4 coats on the chairs and bases of everything else. So I'm gonna have to get a hand to get this over there. All right. Okay guys, so I got first coat on this table and it laid down just fine. So the customer would like the table to be a little bit more yellow, so I'm gonna do some spray tinting. I knew it would be a little light, so that's fine. So I'm gonna mix up like a maple, just like a colonial, not colonial, but a little lighter than that, like a natural yellowed maple color, and spray tint everything, including the chairs, and get it to a little bit more what she wants. So I'll mix that up and show you guys how I put it on. Okay, so I like this as a base from where to work from. It's evened out everything and kind of done the job of a bleach toner. And a bleach toner is something that I use a lot in the shop. It's kind of like a muted whitewash, very translucent, just to kind of take care of really dark spots and to do any touch-ups on stains, just to make things fade away. It's kind of like giving it a fresh start, bringing it back to like a lighter zone before you go into a deeper zone with a color. So you can hide major defects with bleach tone and use it to get a lot of different effects. So that's kind of what this color is doing, which is good because this piece had a lot of red, if you remember, and it was impossible to get all out. So areas that we didn't quite get out are kind of toned down now with this color. So I think what I'll do now, because it's not quite the maple color that I want it to be, is use a straight burnt umber to give this a little more orangey, maple-y color. And hopefully that's the ticket and I don't have to do any other coloring. So I'm gonna set that up in the gun and see how it looks. So it's looking pretty good. Still a little light and a little bit on the too warm side. So I think what I'm gonna end up doing is adding a coat of raw umber, and I think that for sure will get it for me. Different light here. So give it that little bit of a caramel tone that I'm looking for. And you can't really see the color on the camera very well, but it's a little bit more colonial than I want it. Looks actually pretty awesome on camera, but standing here it does not. So I'm going to add a nice green raw umber, if you guys are familiar with the color. It's, here I can get it on a, I'll just put it on here. It's a very greenish, browny color that you can see in a lot of old pieces. They're used with it, or they're stained with this color. And it just kind of gives it that really super caramel brown that a lot of old maple pieces have. So I think that's gonna hit it for me. I've got all the defects and the red in the grain all muted nicely, so everything's really even and it looking good. So I just need to give it that final touch of color, and I think we'll be good. So let's get it. So I just got a thin color lacquer to seal all the color up. I'm gonna let this dry for like 2 days, just because we did a lot of color work on it, but I love the color. I like how it turned out. Too bad it's 3 stages, whatever. So we started with a yellow bleach toner, pretty much. Went to a burnt umber and then to a raw umber. So we've got that nice caramel maple look now, looks really good. I've got the leaves in here just to make sure everything is on the same plane. And I won't spray them in here for all the clear coats, just so I can get nice coats on everything. But I think it looks pretty good. And I'll let it dry for a bit and give it probably another coat before a sand. Just because I don't want to sand through any of that color work that I just did, because it took so long and I don't want to have to touch up a color in there. So I'm just going to make sure that it's got a good heavy coat of lacquer on it before I do any sanding. And but I just want this to dry quite a bit before I do that. All right, so that's 4 coats of lacquer today on this table. So it's done. It just needs to cure, and then I can put the leaves back in and the pins, and that'll be good to go. The chairs all have 1 clear coat, so we can start color work on these once they've cured and I sand them down. And as you remember, we had, I think, 3 different colors to go through. So it's not actually a very easy tint job, but just got to get through it. So just gonna let these cure for a little bit and then we'll get to color work. All right, so now that I've got these all sanded with 320 and they've dried a little bit, I'm just first, before I do any toning with the spray lacquers, I'm gonna go around with a little touch-up brush and some light walnut toner. And I'm gonna hit any of my little putty spots, especially from the repairs on the backs. So you can see here, got a little putty spot here that I just wanna hit with some color first before I go and do all the even toning over the whole chair, because then it will just completely hide these marks. And anything that's really dark and stands out, I'm just gonna give it a little touch of color. Just to make these things disappear. Good. And then the other areas that I was concerned about were right where these posts and joints come together. It's quite dark down there. I just want to hit where it's really dark with a little bit of this light color, just to try to make that a little less standouty, whatever the heck I'm trying to say. Look at the front of it here. I mean, mostly it's the front that I'm worried about. So right in here where there's all these dark spots, just kind of want to put some of that caramel color over it. And this one here. And then the other area that I was kind of worried about was where this center rung you really see, meets this side post here. I just want to blob a little bit of color in there, just so it isn't red. So when I go to tone all these areas, I want them all to be that nice caramel color. So you just have to do a little bit more of an opaque application where areas are that you can't get the red out. So I'll continue through all the chairs and do all the little touch-ups on everything, even like areas like this where it's focused in here, where you've got an area that was low and you couldn't stand it right out. You can just blob a little bit of that caramely color over top so it stands out less. So just so you know what the difference the color work is doing, this is the raw clear coated piece and this is the tinted piece. A little shiny because the lacquer is fresh, but definitely getting a little bit more of that warm honey look on the piece. This is still kind of blotchy, so the color work really makes a difference. I got 3 chairs left to do and then I'm done. Okay, so I've got everything, all the color work finished and under 2 coats of lacquer. Well, there's 3, including the base coat, so that might be good. I'll look at it when it's dry after tomorrow, but it's all looking really nice. Table has cured a little longer than the chairs. It's a little less shiny. These will come down too. But we've got that nice warm glow going. And yeah, so I'm pretty happy with how everything's turning out. I think it should be pretty much ready to go. I'll see if there's any little areas that need a little extra color or touch up or anything when they're all dry and I get them together. You can see maybe this chair here is a little lighter than the other 2, so maybe add a little bit of color to that one, but just minor things to touch up on, and then this will all be ready to go. So I'll show you guys when it's all finished and cured. All right, so it is done. I did do another coat on the chairs, so they've got 4 coats on them and they're looking awesome. Everything's got a soft, warm satin glow. These are still curing a little bit, so they'll tone down to where the table's at. But I think we got it looking pretty good. There's the base. All that work stripping it down. Now it's a really nice light set that's got a lot more character, I think, because the color is a lot lighter and you can see a lot more of the wood and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so thanks for joining me on this one, guys. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. And check out our other videos. Thanks again.